Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the entertainment editor at Polygon. It's Susana Polo. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, everybody.
Well, Susana, we're recording this on Monday, January 22nd. It's the beginning of a new week. How was the day in the content minds at Polygon?
January is one of those, when people talk about like, oh, it's kind of slow at my work right now, like, we're not doing a lot. And so things are kind of relaxed. And I'm like, man, I would love to have a job where when it's slow, it means that you can relax. because for us, if it's slow and not a lot is happening, that means that there's less stuff to cover and we have to get more creative and like more on top of it and more like you have to look harder for things to write about and you have to think harder about things to write about. I would love to have like, oh yeah, nothing's really happening right now, be like a chill thing in my life.
I was thinking about that earlier, actually, because I was going through what Polygon had been writing about lately. And I came across your article that was about Baldur's Gate 3 and about basically romancing people and like how you jump off this cliff so you can trigger this romance earlier and everything. And the funny thing is, and I know this is a very me thing, but I love those types of articles more than I like the ones that are just, oh, I don't know. I can't even think of a comic movie that's coming out this year. Dear Lord.
There aren't too many. God, it's Kraven the Hunter, Madam Web, and Deadpool 3.
Kraven the Hunter. Okay, Kraven the Hunter is a great one because you could write an article about how blood transfusions give you superpowers like the trailer shows. But at the same time, it's like there's only so many different ways you can cover this in a new way. But I actually really like, I mentioned to you before my love of that interview you did for somebody did for the Lord of the Rings thing, where it was about how did Legolas jump on that horse. Those are the things I really like. And it's funny, it's a double-edged sword. You might make somebody a long-time passionate supporter of what you do at Polygon by the goofy stuff you do, but that's also not how you generate a massive amount of readers most of the time. So it's like double-edged sword there.
Yeah, I mean, like and it can be fun to be creative, I think, but the thing about having to be creative instead of reporting on the thing that everybody interested in is that it is more of a gamble. And sometimes you'll work really hard and be really creative and like really like what you're doing, and then nobody reads it. And that's a different downer than like, yeah, I'm writing my like 15th end credits post of the year. And I know a million people are going to read this, but like the movie was okay. But everything's a trade-off.
I do think that's really funny. It's, one of the things we're going to talk about today is like the Eisner Awards and the journalism award that went away and everything like that. And one of the things I was thinking about is just like how different our worldviews are, even though in some ways we do the same thing. We both operate on a website where we have to come up with things to write about and then write about said things. And for you, you have to balance what is going to produce for the site and what is going to produce in the right way versus I would like to write about, I don't know, Kraven the Hunter is a bad example because that's actually something that's interesting. But like, let's just say like Marvel decided to in continuity make Peter Parker left-handed instead of right-handed. It's just like, who's going to be interested in that? Versus me, I was on a treadmill earlier and I've been playing the game Death Stranding. And I decided I was going to write an article that ranked comic characters on a tier system based off of how much I would like for them to be my personal porter delivering stuff in the Death Stranding apocalypse world. And like, that's the thing I can do because I don't have to focus on hits, and it just not hits traffic, and it completely skews the job in a lot of ways.
Right. It's just a different, profit mechanism for any journalistic outlet will determine what they cover to a certain extent. And like, not everything Polygon does is purely for traffic. And, it's important for us to remember that like sometimes we can do stuff because it looks cool. And it will make us look cool. And looking cool is part of like being a successful journalistic enterprise, or at least, for the kind of work that we do. Looking cool and getting access to cool things is like how we not only like get more like readers to look at us, but also get the money that we need in order to do things like send people to San Diego Comic-Con from, the folks who purchase ads instead of just the lottery of Google ads. And this is all getting into the weeds of like how online sites like make, pay their employees and keep the lights on. But yeah.
I do like that your last three articles, as far as I could tell, were the Baldur's Gate 3 one, which was about jumping off a cliff for love. Mm-hmm. And then the other two were on Echo, which in some ways kind of feel more like even though you might appreciate Echo, more like capitalizing on a moment as opposed to like Baldur's Gate, which is like, this is a super weird thing my friends and I are talking about.
Well, that's the thing though, Baldur's Gate is still really huge for us. I think it like just came out on Xbox in December. So the audience for that is still going, and it's still something that we know, like, yeah, we can post an article about this and people will read it, because people are still really interested in it. And I'm working on, that's kind of like the space in which I am doing some things. I did a little bit of like news writing today towards the end of the day about some stuff that will go up tomorrow, because I'm like tag teaming with another writer to cover sort of like a developing, scandal's not the word that I'm looking for, but like a developing like moment of conflict and surprise in a community. And the rest of the day I spent doing research for a longer piece on Star Trek. That is maybe more the thing that you've been talking about, which is a piece I pitched last year, when we were like, how can we come up with interesting lists? Like, the list is a fun format, but it's really played out. And like, how can we do things with it that are interesting? And I was like, I want to make a list of the horniest Star Trek episodes ranked by how important and like impactful they were to our culture, because there are a lot of Star Trek episodes that do weird things with sexual attraction that became like really pivotal and foundational moments in like fandom. And also like there's the sort of the story of like, there's an episode of original series Star Trek where that has the first kiss between a white person and a black person on television. And like, anyway, I won't go on because this is not the Star Trek podcast. This is the comics
Not
podcast.
Yet.
But
I'm going to give you a hot take. I don't even know if this is a hot take, but this is a take I genuinely feel. I think the listicle is underrated. And I think it's been underrated by poisonous practices. I think the idea of a list is excellent. I think that some of them are just so cheap that they're just not valuable. But I think you can make a good list and you can make it very interesting. And it's just structure. Structure is good.
Yeah, structure and fun, I think. I think when lists get too definitive, people get too antsy about them, and that also becomes, so it's not just the, the 15th extremely specific list of Batman supervillains, but something that poses an interesting question. We did a nice one for Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon coming out. There was just a list of other versions of the Seven Samurai.
Sure.
Like, movies and television shows that had done the Seven Samurai plot, because who doesn't love an episode of television or a movie that is doing the Seven Samurai thing, but in a different way. It's always fun. You're always getting excited. You're like, oh, they're doing the Seven Samurai. Hell yeah,
Yeah. Okay, so I already mentioned this. Like, well, today's episode is going to be Susana and I talking about some comic-related subjects we weren't able to talk about on our platforms this year because the things we're talking about, we have to do things to, keep the ball rolling in the ways it needs to happen. But before we get into that, we're going to talk about some recent-ish news in our space. And I do think it's funny. Like, the listicle thing, I think, is actually kind of important because, we're going to be talking about the Eisner Awards, how they opened up their nominations recently, and one category was missing, which was the best comics-related periodical in journalism. And I think it's interesting. This news came at an interesting time because it found like a lot of journalists or people who work in this space were like, this really sucks. And then a lot of people being like, of course, journalism doesn't exist in this space. Why should this award continue to exist? And I do think that to some degree, some people have their vision of this space colored by the fact that most of the time when they see a comic site, it's somebody being mad about like a CBR listicle. It's like 10 times that Strife was better than Cable or something like that. I don't know if that listicle exists. That sounds like something that could exist, though. It's interesting because a lot of people, I don't want to say were rooting for this to happen, but it seemed like they weren't totally against it happening. So this is our world to some degree. I have to ask for your view on that. How do you feel about that category going away?
I mean, I don't like it. I think the Eisners are diminished for not recognizing journalism in this space. I think it may have been hard, and I think that like maybe a lot of the same outlets got nominated year after year. But maybe I think in a nutshell, if I had to give, you're asking me, is that I think there probably were better ways to improve that award than getting rid of it entirely. I think a journalism award is important to, I don't know, I think the comic book industry needs a fourth estate.
Yeah.
I just think that's a good idea. And if you're thinking of it from the framework of they're getting rid of this award because there's no good comics journalism out there, it's not going to help create better comics journalism to stop giving comics journalism awards, to, take away one way in which good comics journalism is recognized on a yearly basis.
I agree with you. The thing for me is, like, personally speaking, I don't really care. I actually don't submit sketch to the Eisner Awards or anything like that. That's not a statement about the Eisners being bad or good or something like that. That's just, to be honest, it like caused me a lot of anxiety when I would be like, oh my God, am I going to be nominated? I'm like, what if I don't get nominated? And then you don't, and then you're just like, oh, I'm so crestfallen, amongst other things. There's a number of reasons, but that was definitely a big one. But there's two things that happens when they happen when they announce that. Is one is it reinforced a lot of the feelings that people already had about comics journalism, in the sense that this isn't a worthwhile space and that nothing good is coming from it, which I think is incorrect. I mean, I understand people have problems with it, but at the same time, you don't judge movies based off of like 5 bad movies. You judge it based off of the totality of the space or something like that. And then the other thing is, it doesn't give anyone a reason to improve things, as you were saying. And that's a huge bummer, because there's already bad vibes in this space. There's already a big challenge writing about this stuff, or writing about anything online anymore. And I think that it creates or it reinforces the perception that this space is not worthwhile. And that's just a huge bummer.
Yeah. It's so, so, so difficult to keep the lights on in any journalistic enterprise, and to do it in an incredibly niche subject, without major sponsors, or with just, running on Google Ads, is extremely difficult. It's so hard to run a volunteer organization on the internet that is doing stuff where your writers put their opinions out there and get excoriated, have the chance to get excoriated on social media for it. It's not a fun job. And it's not, it's a fun job, but there are a lot of aspects to it that are going to drive people away and are going to make it very difficult and really like soul crushing, and, suck that fun out of it. And on top of that, just not be able to compensate people, properly for the work that they do. It's really difficult to get that done. And I'm really lucky to be at a place that I feel very stable at and very secure at, and that pays me really well. They can pay me better, but everybody could get paid better.
Yeah.
And I think that we have submitted Polygon to the Eisners a couple of times, which is not to say that I'm not out here being like, Polygon should win an Eisner for, the comics coverage that we do every now and then, because we're not explicitly a comics outlet. But what I didn't know, and I think Graham McMillan wrote about a few years ago, he wrote a great piece about how the journalism award of the Eisner should be changed, and specifically argued that it's kind of invisible. It's not one of those things that I knew about the Eisners until he wrote this piece, which is that the journalism award was restricted to outlets that solely cover comic books. So Polygon was never going to win an Eisner, no matter how many times we submitted it. And it also, Graham made this great point that why wouldn't BuzzFeed be eligible for an Eisner for their expose on, I can't remember his name.
Eddie Berganza.
Yes, thank you. That was an incredible work of journalism. Mm-hmm. And it legitimately changed the American comics industry, and, was, a product of a lot of really hard work in the journalistic space, taking comics very seriously, but also it was an act of, love for this industry and this community and creators and the work that they do, to hold someone accountable and to say that the industry should get better, and to do the work so that it can. And that piece was, BuzzFeed wasn't going to win an Eisner for that. The Eisner's rules didn't have a space to recognize that. And I think that, in retrospect now, I'm like, yeah, Graham was right. If you want to highlight, if it's becoming increasingly more difficult to maintain a comics only journalistic edifice without sliding into clickbait is a word that gets overused, but you know what I mean, without sliding into stuff that makes it unenjoyable to, regularly patronize a comics website, that without having to compromise on how you compensate your workers, or compromise on how many ads are on your site, or make all of those compromises. If it's becoming increasingly difficult to do a site that covers comics in exclusion to everything else, and not compromise on those things, then we should be recognizing where that work happens. And and that not only, if a larger site that covers other things is like, oh, holy shit, we were nominated for an award in this smaller industry. That is something that the people who did that work can take to editors, to executives, to marketing, to everybody upwards in their company and go, hey, like the industry that we did this work for is recognizing us and thinks that it's very cool. That means that we're cool. Like we talked about how that it's not just about traffic. At a certain level, you have to do cool things, and people will recognize, people who hold the purse strings recognize when you do cool things, if it's sufficiently cool enough. This is a very broad way of talking about something very serious, but
You're totally right, though. I mean, that's the thing is we don't know why it was removed. And to be honest, I don't know if you saw the Popverse article about this, but it's not the first time it's been taken away. And it's come back and et cetera, which to me makes it even weirder. I know it's like makes it more understandable, but also makes it weirder to me because it's just like, why is it a good category one year, but not the next year and not the next 2 years? And then the next 3 years, it's good. It's just weird. And I know that the awards are long, but getting rid of one category doesn't really help. And so to me, it's just, I don't know. I mean, there's a cost to it. I just don't see very much benefit, which is one of the strange things. But before we move on, I did want to ask about the broader space because it's undeniably a tough time to write about anything online. I mean, we're coming off of a week where Sports Illustrated got rid of basically all of its writers, and like that's the sports industry. And then Pitchfork was, I don't even know what you'd call it, was swallowed up by GQ and resulted in like most of the staff going away. And like that's Pitchfork. That's like one of the most renowned voices in music journalism history.
yeah.
So comic sites having a tough time is unsurprising. But I'm curious as to, do you think that the challenges that are impacting the kind of comics and broader nerd journalism space, are those the same things that are impacting all the rest of that world? Or do you think it's things that are unique to comics?
It can't be all one or the other, right? There are unique factors to everything, but it is absolutely something that is happening everywhere. I mean, the canary in the coal mine when economies go on downturns, or when people think the economy is in a downturn, which can also be an economic downturn because that's how finance works. The canary in the coal mine for that is advertisers. That is that companies will cut out their advertisement budgets first because that's the easiest thing to cut, and that affects everyone downstream who wants to put ads on things. That hits online media pretty hard. You'll see like Google ad revenue dive, or you'll find your team will just find it difficult to get like Razer computer accessories to buy ads on your video game guides coverage that's not a real example, just in case anybody that's that is plucked out of the air as an example. That hits all media that depends on advertising revenue, which is like all online journalism, or almost all online journalism. And that hits downstream every comic site or little gaming site that you have that is owned by a larger conglomerate. That larger conglomerate, maybe the comic site's doing okay, but the other sites in their verticals are seeing traffic dive and seeing marketing revenue go down, and the company has to tighten belts in various places. And it's a big old ecosystem. It doesn't help when enthusiasm for some of the old standbys wanes in nerd culture as well.
You mean like Marvel Cinematic Universe and things like that?
Maybe that's what I mean.
It's true. And also, I mean, like, that's the thing, going back to the interconnected nature of this. I mean, a big part of this is the fact that social media has fallen apart, which has led to a lot of the traffic going down.
I mean, yes and no. Like, Twitter never drove a ton of traffic, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the algorithmic stuff, all these different things, it's all a big part of a very big pie that, I don't know.
And we haven't even mentioned, like, Google like doing moving away from getting you to click on actual websites and trying to use AI to surface information from the sites on the Google page. Like that's a whole thing that is hitting a lot of online outlets really hard. And
this just reminds me of something that I've said a number of times about the comics industry, but it's also true for this, like the comics journalism space. Is we often like to think that comics is this really unique space that's different than everywhere else, but it's facing a lot of the same problems everybody else is. And everybody's doing their best to manage it. Well, some are. The CBR stuff was super weird. I don't know what's going on there. That just seems messy. But it's very strange. Before we get into our comic talk, though, you had a question for me. What is your question?
Yeah, as long as we're still on journalism, I wanted to So David and I ran into each other in New York Comic Con, and one of the things I said to him is something that I've been wanting to say to him for a while, which is that I really admire how great he is at interviews. My dirty little secret is I hate doing interviews. I hate preparing for them. They're the only thing in my life I get stage fright for. It's just so much of like juggling like the social situation, but then also I need to get a good quote, but then like what if I don't know? What if I say something? Oh God. And David always seems incredibly prepared. He always has such fascinating questions to ask. And I wanted to ask you, how do you prepare for interviews?
So the shortest version is I normally do a lot of reading ahead of time. Like for this, I don't have to do a lot of reading because we're going to talk about things that we wanted to talk about that we haven't been able to talk about. So I've already done the prep throughout my life, basically. But for example, like when I had Rick Remender on the podcast a little while back, like right after we met up at New York Comic Con, what I did to start with is I just read a bunch of interviews going back to like 2002, basically as far back as I possibly could. I didn't read all of them or anything like that, but I tried to like look at ones that seemed like they weren't questions about like Frankencastle or like why do you like writing X-Men characters or something like that, something that gets a little bit more in depth. And a lot of that kind of comes down to it's not about the questions that are being asked, it's about what the person kind of responds to and what they don't respond to. And so like kind of finding out the types of things that they enjoy talking about. So it's kind of more understanding the person than understanding the kind of questions I want to ask or anything like that. Because, I mean, you can read any interview and you can find what people do or don't respond to. And then another thing I always try to do is like with first-time guests, I try to have them on and I try to talk about their background beforehand so they kind of get built up before they start talking about the thing we're there to talk about so they feel more comfortable. And also, this is just kind of how I am, Susana. I mean, it's like, I remember having dinner with a couple people at New York Comic Con a few years, like 2018 or something like that. And I was talking to them. My wife, Amber, and I were out to dinner with them. And one of them just asked me, like, are you interviewing us right now? And Amber's response is, this is just how David is. And I'm just always curious and always asking questions and stuff like that. So it's just a natural extension of myself. But in terms of actual prep, I do prep a document where I have like topics and things that I, know we're going to be talking about. And I try not to script it out too much because if I start scripting out, I start getting in my head and start getting like, oh my God, I didn't ask this just right. I always say that those documents start with basically question 1, and then I go to 17, and then like 5, and then 25, and just ping pong back and forth. So the goal is to just make it a free-flowing conversation and just let people be people. And that's my best. Also, my memory is like ridiculous. Like I remember things that are so random and I don't even know why. Like my wife is just always bewildered. Like, yes, so we were in Portland and I was playing the game Crazy Taxi. Do you know the game Crazy Taxi?
Yes.
I was at an arcade and I was playing it. And I told her, I was like, I think I know this city better than I know Anchorage, Alaska, the place I've lived in my entire life. Because I'm like, oh, I got to drop somebody off at Fila. I just go this way. And she's like, are you even looking at the arrows? No, that's just how my brain works. So does that answer it?
Yeah, no, that was really good. I think the format is also like, like interviewing for a podcast is very different than like,
yes.
I'd say that unfortunately the majority of the interviews that I do in my job are junket interviews for the big Marvel movies, the big Hollywood productions, where I have 4 to 10 minutes to talk to 2 people at the same time and get a good quote out of them. Whenever I'm not doing interviews in that space, I have to sit with myself beforehand for at least a minute before it starts and go, okay, listen, this one, you don't have to start as quickly as possible, say who you are and where your outlet is, and then launch into your first question as fast as possible in order to like get everything into, because I have like 4 questions that I need answers to, and I have 3 minutes to do it. And I've gotten so used to that rhythm that it can sometimes, I have to take a moment to myself at the beginning of interviews where I have a whole healthy 20 minutes to talk to somebody and remind myself that I'm not like, I won't have someone giving me a 30-second warning in 2 minutes. And one trick that I've figured out, this goes back to your point about figuring out what people like to talk about, is that a new trick I've developed for these junket interviews when I'm talking, not to actors necessarily, but usually it's a pretty good bet for writers or producers sometimes directors on superhero projects is that I will go in and let them know, because I'm wearing like a nice sweater and some regular earrings. I don't have any like immediate like I'm a nerd like trappings, and everyone else they're talking to at this junket is from like the Hollywood Reporter or other sites or whatever. Is that I tell them right away to say I'm Polygon's comics expert, and if I can find the right person for that, they will be like, oh, so I can just say Marvel Knights and you'll know what I'm talking about. And I'm like, yes, let's talk about Marvel Knights and how you were inspired by that for Echo, and let's talk specifics about that. Or I got an interview last year for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie.
Sure.
And they contacted us beforehand and they were like, we do have Seth Rogen, but we're not going to give him to too many people. So you have to come up with like what do you want to, you have to tell us what you want to talk to him about, because we won't be accepting like every person. You won't be handing him out to everybody. And my editor was like, what do we want to talk to Seth Rogen about? Can we think of something that we think they would find interesting? And I was like, I thought for a minute and then I was like, why don't I just talk to him about comic books? Like he's made so many comic book things.
Yeah.
Why don't we just tell them that I would like to talk to him about comic books for 10 minutes? And we got it. And I talked to him about comic books for 10 minutes. And he was really just seemed like he was just like, yeah, like great. Like he seemed very excited about just like, yeah, let's just talk about like Akira and like and We Three and like everything, and the comics of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which like I imagine a lot of people talking to him didn't even know that they started in comics.
Right. I do think that our interviews, my thing is I'm just trying to have a conversation with people versus yours are utility based and you have to like get this. Otherwise it has been a waste of your time and Polygon's time. And so it's just like, this is going to come out wrong, but I'm going to say it anyways. My goal is to get into the parts that are a waste of time for other people and to just have a conversation with somebody, because a lot of times I feel like people are a lot more interested in getting to know people in the process. And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Looking for the right place to read digital comics? You can find it at Omnibus. Omnibus is a modern digital comic book store and reader app carrying your favorite single issues, volumes, and omnibuses, all day and date. It's just like a comic shop where you pay per book, but digital. Omnibus has even upped its game lately, as they've added a web reader in store on top of its iPad version, with iPhone and Android coming soon. Looking for an ideal digital comic store, but with an excellent shopping and reading experience? One that uses novel discovery features to help fans find their next new favorite book? And one that features many of the best comics and publishers in comics today, including publishers like Image, Boom, Dark Horse, and more? You can find all that on Omnibus. Visit the web store or download the app today at omnibus.app. And now, back to the show. Let's move on to the main topic at hand, which is like random things we want to talk about that we haven't been able to talk about in the comic world. I'm going to let you start. Which item on your list do you want to get into first?
I'll start with Poison Ivy. I've tried to make a Poison Ivy feature happen in this past year. And the thing that finally cinched it was, I'll talk about why I wanted to do it and like the things that I wanted to explore in it. But the thing that cinched it is just that it's an interview thing. It's just hard to get a hold of G. Willow Wilson. She doesn't do a lot of interviews, and it really just felt like I can't talk about the Poison Ivy comic without getting some kind of quote from G. Willow Wilson. And so it just kind of petered out. The idea for it started when me and Polygon's culture editor, Nicole Clark, she came to me and she was like, I am seeing a ton of Poison Ivy fandom on TikTok. And I was like, that's wild, because the Poison Ivy comic right now is like an absolute banger. It's just incredible. And, I was like, I would love to talk to a bunch of like young women on TikTok who are doing Poison Ivy content, about the character, about the comic, whatever, and just talk to them about what they like about the character. I would like to go into, I'd like to get into like, nobody talks about how like the Poison Ivy as a character, the origin that we understand Poison Ivy as today was like one of the first things Neil Gaiman did for the DC universe, like right before Sandman, when he was doing like 1 to 2 little comics before he got that gig, he redid Poison Ivy's origin story. And I think Black Orchid, I'm probably wrong about that. I know he did a comic that was like a bunch of Swamp Thing stuff. And he like added in the Dr. Woodrue and the much more 80s origin of Poison Ivy than the like Silver Age stuff. And also get into the comic, which is incredible. I wanted to figure out who was in charge of that comic's cover and variant cover game. Because I have a friend for whom like those covers are what made her go, I want to read this comic. And I was like, yes, thank God, someone, please, someone I know, please read Poison Ivy. And now she's the person I'm like, yeah, eat the rich, like that I can like go in with her on like, on how great that book is and how beautiful the art is. And I also wanted to talk about, to sort of go in on Ivy's character and the like evolution. What I really wanted to talk to G. Willow Wilson about was what you do with a villainous character who kind of has to become a good guy now because of things that have happened around her over the last 2 decades. Is a thing like the way I explain this goes to like, you have to start with like Harley Quinn and the Joker, right? Like, so Scott Snyder comes in at the beginning of the New 52 and he's like, okay, the Joker is now a guy who has skinned his own face off and he wears it. And he's just an absolute mass murderer, like full-on horror movie villain. And Harley's in the Suicide Squad. And if the Joker's going to be an irredeemable, absolute, just a monster, if Harley's going to be a character that we like and can sympathize with, we have to break her up with the Joker. Like, she can't be that character anymore. She can't be the character the girl who always goes back to him.
Or you can have 3 Jokers.
Listen, we only have an hour.
I know.
We only have however long this podcast is, and it's not long enough.
There's no podcast that's long enough to cover the 3 Jokers. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah. And so if Harley becomes a good guy, and we're saying, okay, so she's with Ivy now, then it becomes exactly the thing that the Harley cartoon show is working out in its later seasons, which is like, if Harley's a good guy, where does that leave Ivy? Because if Ivy is really committed to being an eco-terrorist, not only like as a person, but like as a character, that's what really makes that character like interesting and like gives her something that like isn't exactly like a lot of the other villains sort of in Batman's cohort. And that's been true for the character, like, going back to like No Man's Land, when she was like, I'm safeguarding Gotham's orphans in Gotham's version of Central Park, which I've made into like an inaccessible like jungle. And yeah, so like that, how do you make Ivy into a character who leans closer to the good side of the tracks without filing off all of the things about her that are really fun and transgressive and like the art is so good and G. Willow Wilson is so good at like keeping that like monstrous femininity, but in like a powerful way instead of, not in like not in like a, ew, the monstrous feminine, it's so weird and freaky, but in like but a weird, freaky in a good way. Shut up. Like, we like this.
I've only actually read the first arc. It's one of those ones that have kind of had trade waiting, but I love G. Willow Wilson's amazing. Marcio Takara did the art initially, and I don't know if Marcio is still on there, but Marcio is like somebody who I've always thought was really underrated and just really fit that book well. And I have to say, it's funny. You and I are aligned, I feel like, on a lot of things, but I have like notebooks all over the place of like subjects I want to write about. One that has continued on for like the entirety of Sketch 2.0's existence for 5 years is the Poison Ivy fandom. And it's like something I've wanted to write about because it's so fascinating. It is, I would say, like top 1% most passionate fan base. Maybe not size, but the passion is like very, very significant. So I'm not surprised that there's like hardcore TikTok Poison Ivy stands out there because, I mean, especially it's like climate change and everything like that. Why not? That character is naturally a leaning hero in a way that she wasn't when she was created however many decades ago.
Yeah. And I just found like everything, there's so many things about the book that I find fascinating. And it was just one of those things where it's like, I have to face it. This isn't going to happen in that way. And maybe I'll be able to talk about one of these ideas in the micro later on. And it's not looking so good for the Suicide Squad game now, but she's in it. Like maybe that'll prompt, an opportunity to talk about her. And
I hope you can make it happen. It sounds like it'd be a really interesting article. I do want to say though, from my deep industry nerd stuff, I do like how DC has done the whole mini series that graduates into an ongoing thing. And like seeing that people respond to what Willow and to Marcio were doing and expanding that into more, I think that's great. I mean, in an industry that's really focused on short runs these days, being able to carry something on to something bigger if people respond is, I don't know, necessary, hopeful. something. I want to see more of that. And I'm glad DC does things like that.
Yeah, it's so great to see a miniseries turn into an ongoing these days. It feels so rare.
Yeah.
And you should catch up on Poison Ivy. There's a panel in one of the most recent issues where she has to tell Batman that it's her fault that a mushroom zombie army is approaching Gotham City. And there's this panel of him just looking down and pinching his nose and going, I'm sorry, don't take this personally. This is the last thing I need right now.
Yeah.
It's great.
I feel like if anybody was bringing a mushroom zombie army into Gotham City, I would probably assume it was Poison Ivy.
Yeah, she's hanging out with Killer Croc right now. They're having like NIMBY arguments about how to fix social issues in Gotham.
What a great couple years for Killer Croc. I feel like it really started with Catwoman, Lonely City. Killer Croc, what a character. Okay, I'll do one. I'm going to go major change of pace. One thing I have talked about a little bit on my site, but something I find really fascinating is that Dark Horse Comics just keeps doing really interesting things. They've had this space that they've really succeeded with where they've been doing like video game art books and they've been doing manga and like manga translations of like really old books and really succeeding with that. And I think that's a really cool space. But the fact that they've managed to also do those two things and then do licensed comics, but then kind of carve out this new almost alternative to Image creator owned space where they have people like Tom King and Bilquis Evely are doing Helen of Windthorn, I think it's called. Like it's a upcoming book that looks great. And like it's a follow-up
really to that one.
Yeah, and it's a follow-up to like Supergirl World of Tomorrow, which is like going to be a movie and everything, which is crazy. And then there's
fingers crossed, knock on wood.
Yeah, knock on wood. You never know with the Marvel or the DC stuff, but and then you have Brian Michael Bendis and Alex Maleev are doing Masterpiece, which is a really good book. Patrick Bauer from Challengers forced me to read it, and he was right. It's really good. James Tynion IV and friends are doing stuff there. Ram V and Evan Cagle are doing Donra there, which is an awesome comic. I've read the first issue and it's just amazing. And it's interesting to see how they've kind of went from this entity that seemed like it was like, what are they going to do after they lost all these licenses like Conan and like Predator and like Alien and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden they just kind of shift and become something different. And it kind of reminds me of like when they did the Legend line back in like the early 90s or whatever, where Hellboy came in. And they've kind of become a destination for the most creative types in comics. And I think that's super cool. More creator-owned opportunities for people, the better. And I've heard their deal's pretty good. So thumbs up Dark Horse.
Yeah, I mean, if the deal is good, the deal is good. I don't know. I don't have a ton of insights on that, David, but I do agree with you.
I know it's a super niche thing.
I think there'll always be a special place in my heart for Dark Horse, just from like the Dark Horse icon next to the Hellboy icon. Like that's just, that'll always be the association, and it's a good one.
It's classic. But okay, what is your next topic that you would like to talk about? You have some interesting ones.
Which one do you think is most interesting?
Well, I kind of want to, you brought it up earlier. Let's talk about the Hollywood's big year without nearly any superhero movies, because I find that to be super fascinating. I can't believe I couldn't name, like, is there a Marvel movie this year? I honestly don't know.
Technically, Deadpool 3 is a Marvel movie.
Okay.
They've confirmed that we don't know the extent to which it's going to cross over, but Kevin Feige is quoted somewhere as saying that Deadpool 3 is in the MCU continuity. But yeah, there are only 3 interconnected universe movies this year.
Does that count Kraven the Hunter?
Yeah. Okay. So there's Deadpool 3, which is technically, apparently part of the MCU. And then there's Madam Web and Kraven Hunter, which are part of whatever Sony is doing with Spider-Man. Sony's Spider-Man movies that don't have Spider-Man in them.
Mm-hmm.
Theoretically, we could see the new Spider-Verse this year, although it doesn't have a release date at the moment. I think that's probably a 2025, but
yeah,
we don't actually know.
So what makes that interesting to you? Is that mostly interesting just because it's been so hot and heavy for so long that like going down to this feels like it's kind of, I don't want to say dying, but it's way different.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a turning point. It's definitely like 2025, we're going to get James Gunn's Superman, and we're going to see if Warner Brothers can get that plane in the air a second time. And we'll see what happens with that. Theoretically, we're also getting, I think, his Creature Commandos cartoon this year.
I think that's supposed to be first.
Yeah, it's gonna come out before Superman, definitely. I can't remember whether it's this year or not. But Warner Brothers is gonna start ramping that up. We will probably get some some MCU shows this year. I can't remember what the next confirmed one on the docket is. I don't think we have dates for any of them, but there's stuff like the Ironheart television show has wrapped principal production. So they have footage on that. It's in the can. Daredevil Born Again is being retooled, apparently. So that probably won't hit until 2025, at which point everyone will have completely forgotten Echo and Hawkeye, the shows that it's technically spinning out of. And let's see, Armor Wars is a movie now. So they could probably, they'll hold, if they're smart, they'll sit on Ironheart until closer to whenever that happens. Agatha, the Agatha Harkness show. That I think is slated for this year. I'm doing this all off the top of my head.
It's very impressive.
But yeah, it's so interesting to be in a year where this is all on pause, which of course is not terrifically unfamiliar as someone who worked through 2020. We made it through that with no Marvel stuff and very little DC stuff. I guess Birds of Prey was out right before the pandemic came down. And yeah, it's gonna be a year of waiting to see what happens, I think. And then there's also the question of Kang and recasting, whether they're gonna recast or just abandon the character and go in another direction. A lot of my coworkers are we're not putting any money down, but we're really hoping that if they were really smart, they would just have Dr. Doom walk on screen, and behind him would be a room full of dead CGI Kangs, and you'd be like, hello, I'm the bad guy now.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm actually the big bad.
It is interesting because it's like, I think the easy thing to point to is to say that this is a response to the way things have went the last couple of years in terms of like the quality and the response to all this stuff. And I know that like Bob Iger said things like, we need to focus on quality, not quantity, like the way that they've been going for a while. But also, there was a writer's strike, there was an actor's strike, there was a pandemic. There's a lot of different things that have affected this. There was obviously Jonathan Majors and his, legal troubles that made them understandably move on from the actor and everything and the character. Well, possibly the character, I guess we'll find out. But it's interesting because it's hard to separate all of the real life stuff that's happening from all of this stuff involving like how people are responding to it. I'm curious, like, how do you feel about the superhero movie space right now? Do you feel like we're kind of in like the back half and that there's no recovery possible? Or do you think it's more like it is possibly a return? It just depends on what everybody does next.
I wouldn't say that there's no recovery possible because we have good superhero stories. If we want to talk about, I think the stumbling block that is most interesting to me, it's that I can't stop thinking in my head that, the Ultimate Universe lasted 15 years, and the MCU is 15 years old. I think more than 15 years old at this point. It's not only a pain to catch up on, but the MCU has diverged so significantly from the state of Marvel Comics to begin with that it can no longer just do direct adaptations of Marvel Comics. There's very little space for them, unless you're talking about the Ms. Marvel TV show. They can't directly just tell a story that happened in the comics.
Right.
And that it loses the greatest strength of both of comic book adaptation, which is that you have already focus tested this whole story. This story, that this story has been delighting readers for 20 or 30 years, and that it works, and you can make a movie out of it. And that's what is keeping me just a smidge optimistic about James Gunn's DC movies and him being in charge of that, because he does seem to have this instinct that that we're gonna adapt good comics. We're gonna pick good comics and then we're gonna make movies about them. We're gonna do Superman. We're gonna do Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. We're gonna do Batman and Robin.
The Authority.
Yeah, we're gonna do The Authority. I think there's a lot of speculation that's gonna be All-Star Superman, and I'm like, that feels premature.
It doesn't really jive with the idea that this is supposed to be a younger Superman story. Yeah. All-Star Superman's not really that.
Yeah, it's an ending, but regardless, that gives me a little bit of maybe it won't be awful about the DC movies.
I actually have a lot of hope for it because I think that James Gunn recognizes what makes these stories something that people care about, which is the characters. That's one of the big things that I think Marvel in particular lost in its last couple of the 4 and 5 or whatever, is that I actually really like Shang-Chi. I think Shang-Chi really works. And I think that a big part of that is because it feels like a phase 1 movie as opposed to Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness or Ant-Man the Wasp: Quantumania, which just feel like phase I want to get out of this theater movies. They're just like absolute disasters. I mean, that's one of the things. I don't think Bob Iger was wrong about the quality and quantity thing, because
Yeah.
I didn't watch What If season 2, and I haven't watched Echo yet. Part of the Echo one is I am interested, but just it was poorly timed right before vacation. But I don't feel the need to watch everything anymore, and I do think that's a problem. The other thing I want to note, and I actually hadn't thought about this, it's really fascinating. You talked about how like the Ultimate Universe was 15 years, and now we're 15 years into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. When you think about it, I don't want to say a majority, but a really significant portion of the stories that they've told in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that they've been successful with really were published between like 1998 and 2013. That's out of 80 years of Marvel Comics, and that's a 15-year window, which is kind of insane.
Yeah, they've done so much on like so much drawing from modern Marvel. And yeah, I think a lot of people have been like, well, if you keep drawing from modern Marvel, like eventually you're going to run out of modern Marvel. And if Marvel keeps making the comics, tweaking the comics slightly to make them more like the movies, eventually the movies will have nothing to draw on.
Yeah, it's the dragon eating its tail.
Yeah, but the movies haven't been drawing on like great Marvel comics for a while now, you know. At least not directly. You know, they'll pick up a name, they'll pick up a character, they'll pick up a villain.
I just had my wife on the podcast, and we were talking about Ant-Man, and I said something like, if you asked me where to guide you for a great Ant-Man comic, I'd be like, I don't even know. Where do you send somebody who's like, I love Scott Lang, I want to read this comic? I'm like, I don't know. Watch Ant-Man again, man.
There's actually a pretty good one recently where it was, God, I can't remember the name of it now. I think.
Are you talking about the Al Ewing one?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't.
No, that was like the historical one.
No, it wasn't a historical one. It was the one where it was coming out right during the Diamond shutdown. And Scott was like living in an ant's nest in his daughter's front yard. And there was an ant that he'd named Pamela, who was in charge of like giving him entry to the ant's nest, that he referred to as his landlady.
Who was that? I remember.
It was really cute. It had great art. I remember there was a scene where he went to the Avengers to be like, hey, can you help me with this thing? And they were like, no. And
Zeb Wells.
Yeah.
Zeb Wells and Dylan Burnett. Yeah, I remember that. I remember always thinking, oh, that looks really charming.
Yeah.
Zeb Wells is a good writer.
I enjoyed it very much. All right, well, I'm sorry to refute you. I'm sorry to refute your Ant-Man story, because in general, I do agree with you, though. Like, I don't know, I wrote in a post a little while ago that, like, yeah, you know, like if you ask someone to like name like the greatest superhero stories ever told, none of them will be about Kang. And this is a fundamental problem with the current phase of the MCU. It's just that like Kang he's a bad choice for a load-bearing character. He's much better as a plot device than like
absolutely
someone that you're actually going to like believe is like a menace.
Yeah.
Like,
especially when you're like throwing down things like Secret Wars. I mean, granted, this is coming from the same people who are like, we're going to do Daredevil Born Again, except for allegedly not going to make the villain Kingpin. I'm just like, why even call it Born Again at that point? I mean, I have major questions about that just because Born Again is my favorite Marvel comic ever.
That's fair.
So my next topic kind of connects with this, which is the fact that Marvel has relaunched the Ultimate Universe. And by relaunched it, I mean, this is going to get into some deep nerd stuff. I'm sure you know this. I don't know if you've read the Ultimate Invasion and Universe stuff. But the funny thing is because Jonathan Hickman is Jonathan Hickman, it isn't the Ultimate Universe. It's what if the maker tried to engineer a new Ultimate Universe that he controlled and basically just mucked everything up. Basically, the maker was editorial. And like, this is Hickman getting to do his own thing. That's not to say that he's got any beef with Will Moss, who's a great editor. But anyway, so that just kind of really kicked into a new phase with Ultimate Spider-Man coming out, Ultimate Spider-Man #1, which it's funny that at another time that Marvel is kind of seemingly struggling in the market and almost to get people's attention in comic shops, the Ultimate Universe is here to save the day again, because I talked to a bunch of shops and it is a massive hit. Everyone was selling out.
Yeah, the Ultimate Universe is nostalgia now.
Well, but it's not just like, that's the funny thing is like Ultimate Spider-Man #1 is like fundamentally completely different than like the original one, because that was completely built off of accessibility and youth. And this is also built off of accessibility, but it's like accessibility and being middle-aged, which is kind of where all those readers are now. So Jonathan Hickman recognizing the natural progression of aging. But I think between that and like Ultimate X-Men being Peach Momoko, just basically doing her thing. And then like Dennis Camp is going to be writing an Ultimates book, which means it's going to be way different than everything else. I think it's got a potential to be, I don't want to say the same thing as it was before, because that was a completely different time for Marvel and it's a completely different species of universe. But I just think that this has a lot of potential. It feels like it could be huge if they play their cards right. And I also just love that first issue. It's like pretty wild that they did a first issue, or that Ultimate Spider-Man comic, where, to use the parlance of Across the Spider-Verse, they reused canon events, or they changed canon events in a way that is so significant yet makes sense for the character. And I just think it's great. I am curious. You said you specifically did not have a lot to say about this comic. Why is it a comic you have very little to say about? Because it seems like one that everybody else is like, let's talk about it.
I don't know, it was good.
End of story.
It was a good comic. I'm interested to see where more of the Ultimate stuff goes. I think that's mostly for me. I'm like, okay, yeah, good. Like, let me see more.
That's a really good response. If Marvel could have
think
50 more comics doing that, they'd be in business. Well, they are in business, but
yeah, no, and I think I don't know. Maybe I don't know how detailed we want to get on spoilers for it.
I think that we shouldn't spoil the big thing in there.
Okay, so like the last page style thing. No.
I think last page is fine. I think, well, I guess, does it even count like all right, screw it. All right, if you have not read Ultimate Spider-Man, here's your warning. I mean, I would say the Uncle Ben thing is like the big thing, but then at the same time, Marvel sent a press release out the same day it was released that he was in the comic, living.
What even is spoilers anymore? But yeah.
When you say the last page, did you mean like him becoming Spider-Man?
No. I wanted to talk about Uncle Ben, to be clear.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, I think, I'm not deep in the paint on Spider-Man in such a way that I could recognize like sort of like where, if like making Uncle Ben an editor at the Daily Bugle is like a reference to something, or is, some thematic thing going back for a long time in Spider-Man comics. But I like it. It's so funny and to me unexpected and like such a fun twist to have Uncle Ben be friends with J. Jonah Jameson.
Well, and also it kind of mellows him out too. He's like a chill friend.
Yeah, it has this really fun like mellowing effect on JJ, and like puts him in this great relationship with Peter that's like contrasts so well. Like I always loved, and I love the transition that happened in comics where J.J. Jameson found out that Peter Parker was Spider-Man and just turned into his dad for a bit, and was like, what do you mean you were Spider-Man when you were 16? What do you mean I was calling it 16? Oh my God.
What have I done?
Take care of yourself, Peter Parker.
Well, and it's funny, actually, did you read the Spectacular Spider-Man issue where they had dinner together? Where it was J. Jonah Jameson and Peter Parker having dinner together? And it was...
I don't think so, no.
It was Chip Zdarsky and drawn by Michael Walsh, I think. There goes my stupid brain remembering really dumb stuff. Anyways, it was a really good issue, and it was really fascinating to see that. But I think the thing that is really cool about that comic, though, is... there's all these different things. Like people got, if you're talking about Poison Ivy having the most passionate per capita fan base, then Spider-Man has the largest ultra passionate fan base of any character in comics, in my opinion. Way more than Batman. So it's like people have like really strong feelings about whether or not he's married, whether or not he's with MJ, whether or not being Spider-Man is a curse on his life and all stuff like that. I think one of the smartest things that they did, beyond the having their cake and eating it too, of him being married to Mary Jane and having kids in like a separate universe, because then it'd be like, if you don't like this one, you can go this way. The thing I think is really interesting is that in this story, the maker prevented him from becoming Spider-Man, like prevented the radioactive spider from biting him, that canon event from happening. And he always felt like something was missing from his life. And so basically they reframed his life, his becoming Spider-Man as a choice. And like, that is like really cool. It's like, he's basically like making, with great power comes great responsibility, something that he chooses for himself, and that his wife supports him in, and that his family supports him in, as opposed to like, I'm going to be a weirdo who changes in alleys all the time and like has backpacks everywhere that I have to discover in 2 consecutive video games. And I think that's so smart. Jonathan Hickman, apparently good at comics.
No, you've convinced me. You're right. That is very compelling. That was the things that I'm not deep in the spider themes on to make that connection. To me, the middle-aged Peter Parker, I'm like, yeah, okay, I've seen Spider-Verse.
Yeah.
Let's play around with this for a while. But it's interesting to me because I often find myself explaining to my coworkers, and they're what's what are the tensions of Spider-Man? What are the we get talking about it, and I talk well, it's the one of the eternal conflicts with Spider-Man as a character now in mainstream Marvel continuity is that as Douglas Wolk says, Peter Parker is always ping-ponging between you want him to be a teenager and be a loser, but you also want him to grow up over time and become a guy who marries Mary Jane and has some nice things. And the conflict with that in current Marvel continuity is that you can't make Spider-Man a teenager anymore because Miles Morales exists.
Right.
Because Peter is now in a mentor role. He has a character who is always going to be a teenager, and Peter can't be a teenager with Miles at the same time. And so it's funny to me that now we are redoing the Ultimates universe where Miles is from. and even though Miles isn't there, well, I mean, he probably is, but I don't know what the maker did to him.
Yeah.
I did really enjoy the scene in the miniseries introducing it all, where the maker goes to Miles and is like, "Hey, so I'm starting a new universe. Do you want in?" And Miles is like, "No." Absolutely not. No. It's well, here's my card. Bye. Just a great. The maker is I love the maker is no one can approach Doom, but he is a great camp villain in the same vein, and I appreciate that about him.
How perfect is it that he's Reed Richards, though? The closest approximation. I mean, that is kind of the nature of the character, though.
Yeah. I love the we'll get back to Spider-Man in a second, but I love the people who read Hoxpox and were like, I think Professor X is secretly the maker. That's the twist on this because he never takes the helmet off. I was like, that's absolutely not what it is, but what a wild idea. What absolutely wild.
This reminds me of the line of thinking that led me as a child to think that the Spice Girls were a reformed Indigo Girls because I thought that indigo was a spice. It's just there's two things that are vaguely connected. Two guys wearing a helmet, they got to be the same guy.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it's very funny that we went back to the Ultimate Universe and instead it's that Peter's middle-aged now.
Yeah, that's one of the fine things about it, though, is the way that they set it up isn't just a nostalgia play. It's actually building something new. It's they're building something new from column A and column B and finding where that takes them. And I think it's really fascinating.
And to be clear, I don't think there's anything wrong with a nostalgia play. I've been waiting for decades for the people who grew up on Batman the Animated Series to be in charge of Batman comics. and so then I could finally get my turn at being the person who is nostalgia baited.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. New year, new Zoop. Zoop is proud to be the home of the first ever Jack Kirby crowdfunding campaign, Sky Masters of the Space Force, the complete Sunday strips. Also, by popular demand, they're reopening the Conan the Barbarian campaign featuring the legendary art of John Buscema, Gil Kane, Barry Windsor-Smith, and more. There's still time to support projects from Colin Bunn and the Maui Strong fundraiser, benefiting those affected by the Maui wildfires last year. Head over to zoop.gg to support the live campaigns and sign up for ones coming soon. It takes less than 30 seconds to create an account, and the e-commerce style checkout is easy and intuitive. Add multiple rewards and add-ons into your cart, provide some info during checkout, and you're done. No confusing additional steps in finalizing your pledge, and no post-campaign surveys. And of course, every creator appreciates your support. For creators looking to crowdfund your project, Zoop is currently open for submissions. Email them at hello@wearezoop.com to start a campaign. And now, back to the show. That gives us a good transition. One of your topics was Batman related.
Yes. Yeah, this is I mean, there are probably exceptions to this, but it's just something that I feel like I've observed is that every new Batman out of continuity Batman miniseries that DC announces, Batman's either learning a valuable lesson about how he shouldn't do a police brutality or he's being sent to space. And it's only those two options. He's either fighting aliens or he is beating up criminals too bad and has to learn that that's a no actually.
Isn't it funny? I was thinking back to Batman Universe. Did you ever read Batman Universe?
The Bendis?
The Bendis and Nick Darrington comic?
It's a great comic.
Yeah, it's a really great comic. And it's funny because it's like whimsical Batman. And you like read stuff like that. And then you think about like Jason Aaron and I think Doug Mahnke doing Batman Off-World and stuff like that. I love that
I
they
love
literally
Batman
just,
Off-World.
yeah, they
I
just call it
love the
Batman
idea for
Off-World.
Batman
Like,
Off-World. Do you
get
know
your ass in space, Batman. Get out of
do you
here.
know why he's in space?
No.
It's incredible. He is in space because the Irish mafia hired it's like early Batman, right? Like young Batman. The Irish mafia hired an alien hitman who's too strong for him to beat up. And Batman's like, shit, I've only learned how to fight people on Earth. So he gets him on a spaceship and he rockets himself into like deep space, like the worst part of space, like the narrows of space, so that he will be forced to learn to beat up every alien, I guess.
So it's like the beginning of Batman Begins where he's like fighting in the prison, except for he's now in an alien prison
Yes.
sent by
Like
Irish
literally that.
mafia.
Yeah.
Where do Irish mafia get a hold of aliens to beat him up?
I don't know. It's the DC universe. Like their response to Batman existing was, well, aliens exist, so we're gonna hire an alien hitman. And like literally all of that is established in the first issue. And then he's in this like alien war machine that like conquers planets, abducts people, and like either forces them into their war or like forces them to like do terrible slave jobs and like die cleaning their spaceship engines. And everybody's like, and nobody realizes he's a bat.
Oh my
Nobody knows
God.
what bats are.
Yeah, of course.
Like there's a great first fight scene where they're like he's shooting smoke out of his body, like he's got claws, like they can't figure out, they don't know what a human is either.
Yeah, I was going to say they don't even know what a bat or a man is.
And they're like, wait, those aren't wings, that's just fabric. Like they're absolutely mystified and they all think he sucks because he won't kill anyone because he's Batman and he's fighting aliens, but he still won't kill anyone. He befriends a training robot that only punches called Punchbot, that he gets Punchbot to teach him how to punch aliens.
This is like the scene in High Fidelity where it's like, I'm about to sell 5 copies of the Beta Band's 3 EPs. I'm like, I'm going to go buy Batman Offworld after this. Now I just want to know how Jason Aaron pitched Ben Abernathy, the Batman line editor, on this. It's just like, all right, step 1, Irish Mafia. Step 2, aliens. Boom. Ben's like, I'm sold. Let's make it happen. Doug Mahnke.
Yeah.
Boom.
Step 2, step 2, the rule that Batman trained hard to be good at everything.
I do think it's funny though, because there's so many Batman comics right now that you kind of got to cover everything at this point. There's like Batman doing a little bit of everything. There's like Christian Ward doing like kind of an Arkham Asylum follow up. And then there's like, I don't even know. I've heard really good things about Raphael Grandpa's Batman Gargoyle of Gotham.
I bounced off both of those pretty hard.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah.
Famously, by famously, I mean, we started talking about this before we started recording. You have a lot of Batman love and Lego Batman love. And I mean, it is interesting because it reminds me of one of the things that, you know, I would say about Krakoa, the early days of the Krakoa era for X-Men, is there's enough different flavors that you can kind of have your own flavor of X-Men where you can bounce out and you're like, you know what? I'm more of like a pirate type person. You're like, well, we got Marauders, so there you go. It seems like with Batman, it's like if you don't like it, you can just bounce out and find your Irish Mafia alien comic that you've been waiting for.
Yeah. And I think I'm just very defensive over I think the preponderance of the Batman story that is about him realizing that he's being kind of fascist or being kind of totalitarian.
What's a good example of that? I'm not reading a ton of Batman right now.
To be clear, I bounced off of these issues early, so maybe it turns it around and I should give it another chance. But that's kind of why I bounced off both Christian Ward's miniseries and the Raphael Grandpa miniseries. And I feel like that's like the Batman, the movie, was also like playing that tune. There is, and obviously like the reason is not like I think Batman should be a fascist, actually. It's just that if the reason we're telling this story is because we recognize that like stories where Batman is kind of a fascist are bad, and we want to fix that about our hero that we like, is the thing is that like Batman's not a person who needs to learn a lesson. He's a fictional character, and we can just write him as not a fascist. Like we can just write really good Batman stories where he's not a fascist. Like, you can't tell me that like the Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams Batman wasn't like full of compassion and like and you know believed in rehabilitation of the criminal, you know, like he did. Like that was you know the tenor of Batman stories for decades and decades, and we can just write more of them. Is kind of my my issue on it. Like why does Batman need to learn this lesson in a book unless like I don't know, like I don't want to like I don't want to like
I
try
get
and
it.
psychoanalyze folks, but like I'm like yeah, like Batman can just be you can just write him better. That's awful.
Burn.
You could just write him as a better person.
Yeah, I get it.
But at the same time, like I love a Batman who doesn't know how to relate to his children. Like that's mwah, perfect to me.
My favorite Batman scene from the last year was there was a issue that took place between when he was in the other universe, the one that culminated with issue 135 in Batman itself.
You're talking about the breakfast?
The breakfast with Bell and Ortega. That scene
Yeah.
was so good. I know it's like totally like Wayne family adventures, but that was that was great.
Yeah.
That was such a good scene.
But at the end of it, he starts hallucinating that they're all on fire because that's my boy. He can't be normal. I love him.
Exactly. Chip Zdarsky, you understand that Batman contains multitudes. Yeah. Also, Bell and Ortega crushed that issue. It was such a good looking issue.
Yeah, listen, what Batman taught me as a person is that it's not about solving the problem. It's about always willing to get up the next morning and keep working on it. And like, there's this thing that like Batman should solve problems. He should solve crime. Like he should get rid of he should get rid of the Joker. And because Gotham City is still full of crime, like he's bad at it. And it's like, no, like Gotham isn't a real city. It's a fictional construction. And the metaphor is about the never ending battle and about getting up and how slowly we will change things over time. And you don't get immediate results, but you keep trying and how to keep going.
Yeah.
Like that's my guy.
I mean, you can't have too many problems solved. Otherwise, Detective Comics would have finished well before 1,000 issues. So
exactly,
it's an ongoing story. It's not a problem solved story. Batman can't be too good at his job.
The never-ending battle for truth and justice.
That's right. And also fighting Irish mobster fueled aliens.
Yes, yeeting yourself into space in order to learn how to punch aliens. Good.
I love it.
That's also my guy.
All right, I'm going to go a wild change. I'm going to go an adaptation route. I never talk about adaptations, so it's very rare for me. Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. The thing that I really appreciate about Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is the fact that it actually kind of reminds me of something I read on Polygon today when I was prepping. It was talking about, I think it was Joshua Rivera that was talking about the no return roguelike game that they released for The Last of Us 2, where it like completely reinvents the game without the plot, and it's just like, this is just a cool, crazy game you get to play. Scott Pilgrim Takes Off takes the concept of Scott Pilgrim and completely reframes it. It's like Scott Pilgrim minus Scott Pilgrim. It's like Garfield minus Garfield. It's just like it becomes something completely different. And it shows that you can do new, exciting things with adaptations and get more from a new take while maintaining the complete spirit of the original story, that you don't have to be beholden to it and you don't have to be mad because the creator's sanctity has been ruined because the creator is involved with ruining the sanctity of it. And I thought it was a fun show and just like a fascinating proof of concept that as we enter this new phase of adaptations of comics and stuff like that, that they can be more or different, whatever they want to be. And I think that's great.
Yeah, no, I'm always interested in like that we have this like gut check idea in, I think, a lot of comic book fandom and, like sci-fi fantasy fandom to a certain extent, just like genre work, that like live action film is like confers some kind of legitimacy on like the stories that we like, or like that's the end all be all, like that's, even if it's bad, like, hey, Hollywood's paying, like I'm not sure why, like it could come from a lot of different places, but there's this like, oh, they're making a movie thing. And I think some of that is, from back in the days when they really didn't make those movies a lot.
There's like an inferiority complex to some degree connected to it too. I mean, it's why everyone always, it's one of the many reasons why everyone always asks Martin Scorsese for his thoughts on Marvel movies.
Yeah, and to see an adaptation where it's like we're adapting this to say a specific thing. Some of it is saying the same thing that the original work did, but also some of it is commenting on the original work, but also some of it is speaking directly to the people who loved the original work, or maybe challenging the people who loved the original work to like look at it from a different angle. And that's like that's where I wish everyone's knee-jerk reaction went to for adaptation, where it's like, yeah, but like why? Because like I could go back and read the original comic. So like why? And like I knew so many people that like, we got We got the episodes early and we watched the end of episode 1, and then we immediately got in Slack and we're like, holy shit. Like this isn't we got this might actually be big. Like this we actually need to get down on this and start working. And I told so many of my friends, I was like, listen, you didn't hear this from me because it's not out yet. But if you like anything about Scott Pilgrim, if you're interested in it at all, you need to watch one episode of this cartoon show. And I knew so many people who were like, yeah, I was going to skip it because, like I saw the movie and like it was a long time ago and like, that's kind of fast. I saw it and like that's fine. And then watched the first episode and went, holy shit. Like, and watched the entire series.
Yeah. Well, and also like the cast is like filled with so many interesting, cool characters. Like, did I ever expect to want a spin-off show of Lucas Lee and Gideon Grace being roommates? No, absolutely not. I always wanted more of Wallace, and I got exactly what I wanted, which is more Wallace, but also just like a wildly, I mean, no, exactly the same, but also completely different dose of Wallace that I really appreciated. I don't know. I mean, it was just so fun to see what they did. And I did see some kind of negative responses to it because they're like, oh, this wasn't like the comic. I'm like, yeah, that's literally the point. It also is exactly like the comic in some ways. It's just like told from a different perspective where, Scott's just kind of out of the picture for a little bit.
Yeah, and like Brian Lee O'Malley, like he's been very candid. He's like, I did that when I was young, and it's a product of like a different me, and I didn't want to return directly to just adapt that straight off the cuff. Like that wouldn't have been any fun for me. But this was, and yeah, like that is also in the category of like ideas that I bounced around in my head last year, could never find the right frame for, which is talking about what in my head and among my friends. It's not a good name for it, but I've been thinking of it as doing an Evangelion. I'm putting big scare quotes around that, which is there's this specific kind of sequel or adaptation that like revisits the original work with a real like I'm pointing a finger at the audience response to the original work. Like there's a conversation and like a slight combativeness even to like how like the creator returns. So you have, like the fourth Matrix movie, I think is like among my examples of it.
I actually like that movie.
Yeah, it's a blast.
Yeah, it's great.
I think I'd put like Adventure Time Fiona and Cake like is doing that.
Godzilla -1 is actually an interesting example of that too.
I could see that. Yeah, I could see Godzilla -1 filing into that.
Yeah, and like Shin Godzilla and stuff. Yeah, it's just like revisiting the idea and finding a new direction for it that still feels the same but doesn't lose kind of the heart of it to some degree.
Yeah. And key to me is like being conversant with like what the audience and the dedicated audience has like made out of it in the intervening time. Like you see that a lot, like Matrix 4 is like the really like where you can see it's the Wachowskis. They have characters in the movie who are a mouthpiece for like saying things like, oh, it's a trans metaphor, or and like the movie is, really like parodying like how Hollywood co-opts like a blockbuster idea, but then also like bringing in like the folks for whom it was just like cool people wearing leather with no like depth. For them that was the movie without like the depth of all the other things. The co-opting of like red pill, as an internet meme for
that,
and just like for and to the adaptations where creators revisit their work in a conversational way are really fascinating to me.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, I thought Scott Pilgrim I was so surprised by it, and I was just, it's amazing to see an adaptation that has you wondering where they're going to go next, and that was exactly what they did for me. But all right, one more topic each, and then we got to bounce. You have one last on your list, unless you have something else you want to add.
Yeah, and like I'd put down like talking about like the final passing of Comixology and like digital comics distribution. I literally wrote down and I was like, I don't know what to say about this other than I wish it were better, because like I don't know where we go from here, but like boy, I wish it were better.
I think that it's like a legit take, because the thing is the streaming era for movies and TV shows has definitely emphasized that to some degree they have regrets in terms of how the financial realities of that works. But at the same time, for comics, it's just an additional channel that brings money in for creators and publishers and everybody else. And also, it makes it easier to read because like everyone's got a TV, but not everyone has a comic shop near them. And so for some people, having something like Comixology in its full working form was their comic shop. And it going away super sucks. And I don't know. I mean, one of the things I think is interesting about this is it's sort of weird how the idea of having a workable online store for all comic publishers just doesn't seem to be appealing to those involved, because like there's replacements. There's like Omnibus, who I should note is a sponsor of this podcast, and Global Comics, who has another digital comics platform. And the thing is some publishers just aren't signed up with them, even though they're trying to make inroads. Why don't they all want to just make this more accessible? It just seems crazy to me.
Yeah. Well, we have no idea, right? Because we never got sales figures from Comicsology.
That's true.
And we don't have sales figures on the subscription services either. We don't exactly know like just how much money DC Unlimited, DC Infinite Unlimited,
DC Universe,
whatever,
Infinite. Oh my God. I think that's it.
And Marvel Unlimited are.
It is DC Universe and Infinite. I know that because I remember thinking that naming it DUI for its acronym was not the best because it's driving under the influence. But what are you going to do? I don't work at DC.
Right. Yeah. Like we don't know how the numbers on that shake out, and we don't know like because we know like we don't have diamond numbers on that, so we can't guess about that in the same way that I guess we do have Netflix numbers now thanks to the writers' strike. But yeah, we don't know how that shakes out, and it's just I don't know. I say this, I'm like, in my head, I'm like, I wish it was more like the book market where you could get, where you can get a DRM free like ebook of something and read it on whatever device you have. But I'm not in digital publishing. I don't know if that's way more difficult than it sounds, but like it seems like that is, in the most optimistic way. Like it would be great if you could buy a digital comic and then read it on whatever service you wanted to.
At the very least, it doesn't seem like something that should have gotten worse over the last 10 years.
Yeah. Thanks, Amazon.
It's so weird.
Gosh. I remember Amazon acquiring them. I was still on Comixology pull list, and I was like, oh no. But I use Comixology pull list every week. Like I use Comixology pull list to know when graphic novels are coming out, and like collections, so that I can not forget to buy them. And like that was my worry at the time.
The first moment I was like, I don't know if this is going to work, is when they removed the ability to buy the next issue or buy issues in the actual app. Because like I would finish an issue and then I'd be like, well, I guess I want to read the next one. Bye. And once you couldn't do that functionality was like so important. Do you read comics digitally?
Yeah. I mean, I get press issues, so.
If you were buying single issues, would you buy them digitally?
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point, yeah, I live in a New York City apartment. Like, I already have 1,200 single issues, and I still buy now like 2 or 3, like a very small number of physical comics on a regular basis. I just get them mailed to me I'm in New York City, so I can get them mailed straight from Midtown.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm buying Saga because I own every issue of Saga except for Saga #2, and that's a finite series, and I could have the whole set, and I can't say no to that. So I have to keep buying Saga. I'm buying Coda right now because I love Matias Vergara's art,
Mm-hmm.
and I started picking up Birds of Prey,
Which is great.
I just thought that series was incredible, and the art was incredible, and I wanted to support. And like that's kind of my line for like buying physical comics. But yeah, I think a lot of other stuff I would be buying digitally. 2020 kind of really like erased. It used to be like I would put everything on my pull list and I would go pick it up every few weeks on my way back from the office. But when I started going to the office, I stopped kind of like leaving my apartment so much. The pandemic hit, and like going into a comic book shop was like no longer an option. And it kind of like gave me a break and showed me like how that effort, it felt like a lot more effort. And it kind of, I think, would have been a slow transition for me otherwise to mostly digital.
Sure.
And it helps that I have like a 13-inch iPad.
Yeah.
So I'm still reading these comics at normal sizes.
To close, my last topic is I just want to compliment a comic. I'm gonna close by just saying I really like this comic. It's one I didn't really write about at my end of the year stuff, so it's kind of new to like being referenced, but Ryan North, Ibn Coelho, and Ivan Fiorelli are working on Fantastic Four right now, although the most recent most recent issue was not by either of those artists. And the thing I really love about it, the funny thing is like I knew Ryan North was going to absolutely kill it because his science brain fits it so well, and because of the nature of like Fantastic Four, at least to some degree, is like found family, and like Squirrel Girl, I mean, what you couldn't ask for better found family than that. But the decision to make it mostly like a series of one and done stories has made it so accessible and so fun and so inventive, where you get these like highlights for different characters and all these like highlights for different like types of Fantastic Four stories. Like there was this one story, I think it was like issue 10 or 11, where it was not, you don't even really see the Fantastic Four until the very end. It takes place on a spaceship where like time has been like really like the way that they're engaging with time has been thrown off by like some sort of sciencey explanation. And they see the Fantastic Four throughout their lifespans as like these kind of ghost figures. And it's like this really haunting and like beautiful story. And like that's the type of thing that Ryan North has been able to do with this, and like his teammates on art like Ibn Coelho and Ivan Fiorelli have been doing a really good job with. I don't love the fit of those artists. Like I feel like it'd be like 10% better if you had like a Tom Riley or I don't know, like a Javier Pulido or something on there. But it's just such a fun book, and it's so easy to pick up for anyone and just understand how great of a Fantastic Four story each of these are. And I honestly think that a lot of superhero comics could learn from it because it's so accessible in a way that many of them aren't. And I love it.
Yeah. No, I'm not completely caught up on it, but it is absolutely, I'll give anything Ryan North does a try. And it's a lovely little comic. And it's exactly true that you're saying that it feels like it's melding sort of like this like classic Fantastic Four, one adventure in each issue, like Stan and Jack, kind of like weird and wildness. Like I think there's an issue where they go to an alternate Marvel universe where everyone's a dinosaur, but still a superhero, and it's still modern. It's not like Jurassic League or anything. It's just modern skyscrapers, but everyone's a dinosaur, a different dinosaur. But at the same time, it feels very modern in like all the ways that are like Ryan North can like inject like pop culture and science and his whole ideas of like, yeah, like I think that like the kids should be there. Like I think they're an important part of the Fantastic Four. It's really lovely for the Fantastic Four to have, I think, an accessible book and a fun book as like the characters that they are in like Marvel Comics, as like the founders of it and like the family, like there's just like the Fantastic Four should be the characters that welcome you into the Marvel universe. If it's not, Spider-Man or the X-Men,
yeah,
they should be out there representing the best of comics. And as I talk with one of my coworkers much, that they're like, it's like Doctor Who, Fantastic Four, Superman. They're the characters that they're there to to show the victory of intellect and romance over brute force and cynicism. Like that's the thing that you're looking for in them. It's always lovely to see when the Fantastic Four get to do that, like with their whole chest.
Yeah. Well, I really enjoy that run, and I always really enjoy talking to you, Susana. But that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about comics journalism, some of the things we've really been enjoying in comics, and everything else. I appreciate you taking the time.
It's always a great time.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with Polygon's entertainment editor, Susana Polo. You can find her work on Polygon. Big thanks to Deanna Chapman for stepping in to edit this one. If it sounds better than usual, it's because of her. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel, and when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast, as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketched at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by following on Twitter and Instagram at @sketchcomic or following me at @slicefriedgold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Faith Aaron Hicks, Yeah Comics, Ben Rowe, Cameron Brown, Jonathan Breen, Danny Ollie, Charlie Stickney, Tom Drennan, Jeremy Thomas Burke, Jared Schwab, Scott Dunn, Chip Mosher, Alan Ellsworth, Seth Pomeroy, James McEwen, Andrew Lehman, Christina Merkler, Scott Place, Travis Gibb, Darcy Van Polgees, Travis Schmeiser, Tom Evans, Natalie Mockery, Reed Beeman, Kelly Sudaconic, Max Wood, Jeremy Lambert, Brian Hull, Chris Dorey, Near Levy, Jason Hussa, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnson, Django Boren, James Tynan IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Dom, Armstead, Rom V, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Orens, Capes and Tights Podcast, Claus Vandeven, Submit Industries, Jack Mulqueen, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Canadian by Proxy, Bradley Rader, Carl Troy, Brandon DePillis, Patrick Power, Declan Shalvey, Dan Garino, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein-Q, Liana Kingus, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Susana Polo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, Andrew Carita, Stephen Hall, Philip Myra, Chris Pachalo, Torrin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Ta, Transmitter Down, Walt's Comics and Books, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Gibb, Sean Kirkham, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwand, Vita Ayala, Akil, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, David Kelly, Nick Polito, Matthew Groom, Jason Assey, Adam Bogert, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Mark Abbott, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Wolfpack for letting me use their song outro as the show's opening theme, and to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote performed Off-Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.